Alright, quick test here. Is everything, just trying to make sure everything's working. Looks like we're good. Alright, quick test here. Oh, yeah, we're getting playback. Yeah, it's definitely working. Okay, we're good. Alright. So, how are you guys doing? I know my face isn't showing just yet. Let me fix that really quickly. Jeez. Don't stream for like a week or two and then you just forget how to do everything, it feels like. There we go. Hey everybody. How you all doing? There's a lot to unpack. I'm honestly exhausted as well too. But we're here. Thank goodness. Just happy to be here. See a few of you on right now. Let's hope we can get a few more. I was trying to wait a little bit longer. I was trying to get on. I was trying to go live earlier, but well, it's just kind of been the way things have gone lately with work. Things have not been going according to plan lately, and that's kind of carried over the last week and a half here. Unfortunately, I'm trying to work my way through it, but you know, life. Gotta love it sometimes. Well, yeah. Anyway, gotta charge my phone because once this stream's over, I'm going straight to bed. So I gotta be up in a few hours anyway. Anyway, hey John, how you doing? Well, it's officially that time of year, guys. In case anyone hasn't figured it out, it is officially spring, and we have a lot to go over. Today we had a marginal risk, pretty quiet day. Nothing of major significance, but that, as you can see, is about to change, and it's about to change very quickly. We're also going to be, of course, looking at the weather pattern beyond this point because, well, like I said, it's spring, and we all know what that means. There are a couple things that I want to remark on as well, too, because there have been some changes, as you can see here, with the Storm Prediction Center. They've made some new updates. Those were put into effect as of yesterday. And I do want to go over some of the new changes because it might look different to some of you guys, especially some of the old head weather weenies like myself. Like I said, I've been into this kind of stuff long before I started my YouTube channel. So I remember the older outlooks where we had the C text instead of the marginal risk that you see here in the green. It used to be at one point it was a thunderstorm outlook, then it was C text, and then you got your slight risk, your moderate risk, and then your high risk. And then even before then, it used to not even be C text. It used to just be thunderstorm, slight risk, moderate, and then high. So another era has ended here for the SPC, and we usher ourselves into a new era. I'm definitely going to discuss my thoughts on it as well in due time. I was planning on making a video. I was trying to do it last night, but I just ran out of time. It was already like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock before I knew it, and I wasn't even done. But anyway, I guess since we have enough people in here, let's go ahead and get into it. So we've been talking in the times where I have been making videos, and of course we would get a new update here. We're gonna just go back to 18Z here because, like I said, I don't have a whole lot of time. I gotta get ready for work tomorrow. Gotta be up at the crack of dawn, or not even. I'll actually be up before when it's still dark, but that's besides the point. But we've been talking about it. If you caught any of the more recent videos, even though I haven't been able to post as much as I'd like to, we have been talking about the weather pattern ahead here, or at this point now, we are in the weather pattern. we're going to be seeing multiple troughs work their way across the U.S. here over the next couple of weeks. And this is what's going to be the catalyst behind multiple severe weather events. Really not until maybe next week we start to see maybe a potential slowdown because of this cutoff low. But eventually, as this starts to progress, the severe weather threat gets reintroduced to the equation once again. And I do think that as we get towards the middle of the month, it's going to be incredibly active, especially. So if you're going out for St. Patrick's Day, like around the St. Patty's Day weekend, because it's going to be kind of weird how the holiday falls. It's going to fall more so towards maybe like the middle of the month. It's going to be something worth watching. Then we have other systems that are going to be coming in right behind that. This is another one. This one doesn't look quite as impressive as what I was seeing in previous runs, which is a positive, but also, as I've mentioned in previous videos too, the further in the range you get, the less certainty we have available to us, because there's not really a whole lot of model data to make comparisons with. Looking at this range, you have a few ensemble models, which is still good, but you only have one parent model to work with instead of having multiple, which is always what will give you higher confidence in a forecast. But as I mentioned with the pattern before, basically with all those troughs coming through, this is how we got to this point here where we have all the slight risk and even the enhanced risk for Friday. So let's go ahead and start with tomorrow's threat. As I mentioned before, SPC has a new outlook here. It's a little bit more modern looking. I am going to kind of miss the old analog look personally. I think it was really cool. It's just me though. But at first glance, this doesn't really look like it's much of anything different. We still have the 5 main risk levels in our general thunderstorm risk, all the way from general thunderstorm up to high risk in the pink. That's going to stay the same. I know the graphics look a little different, but it's when we start looking at the hazard types, the tornado, wind, hail threat, we still have the probability colors and the outlook being generally the same until we get to this here. Now, for some of us who have been into the weather for a bit here, you'll recognize this, which has the 1 next to it. This was always our hatch risk. We referred to it as our point of interest for significant severe weather, basically hail that's greater than 2 inches in diameter, 70 plus mile per hour winds, or strong to even violent tornadoes. But things have kind of changed with this new outlook here. We now have 3 different intensity scales here. So the old hatch risk here, that's our level 1. We have our level 2, which is a double hatched as it's called, and then we have the triple hatched at level 3. Now, I'm going to make a full video getting into the details as to how all of this works, but essentially when you get to level 1, you can have this at a lower risk now, because we have seen in previous events over the years that we can get strong tornadoes even with like a marginal or slight risk. So that's the basic rundown as to why this scale has been updated, to kind of highlight which areas have the greatest potential for a significant threat and just how significant it could be. I'm trying to get more. I think we're at the point now where the SPC is trying to become that much more finite as we continue to advance in our forecasting here, I'd say. And the tornado threat isn't the only one that gets this update. The hail and wind threat also gets it as well. Notice though, the hail only gets 2 intensity levels. Essentially though, it's the same concept. With the hail threat though, once you get to level 2, I'm thinking we're mainly going to be talking about like baseball sized hail and beyond here. I mean, you could maybe make an argument that it's going you could have a third intensity scale, but that would probably only ever get used over towards like Wyoming and Colorado. But anyway, you do get the wind intensity scale. So basically you're seeing, I would say here for level 1, think of it as, okay, we're just getting above the 70 mile per hour threshold here, which would be significant damaging winds. we're getting above hurricane force with double hatched, and then once we get to intensity scale 3, we're potentially pushing that 100 mile per hour threshold. But anyway, this is our threat for tomorrow, because I've really rambled on a lot about this. But if we were to go ahead and take a look at the slight risk overall, not a large area, not a big tornado threat with this one. I'm leaning into damaging winds mostly at this point in large hail. I expect a lot of these storms to be elevated, personally speaking. But the tornado threat also isn't zero, so this does warrant its own share of attention. So if you're anywhere just to the west of Evansville, maybe even heading into Evansville, it's a sneaky little threat here. Even heading into places like Louisville, Kentucky could be a point of interest, and it stretches all the way down to the U.S.-Mexico border over here. We're also including areas like San Antonio, Waco, Dallas. You're going to need to be on watch for all modes of severe weather. Like I said, again, tornado threat is pretty low, not expecting anything of significance there. And then also looking at the wind threat, it's pretty much the similar deal. We get to day 3, things get a little bit spicier. We're looking a little further back towards the west. This will be what I would consider to be closer to a robust severe signal. And if you look closely at the day 3 risk, we don't get the hazard types yet, but we're already starting to use the intensity scale here. So there's much higher confidence in Thursday's threat being much more significant, to the point where we have intensity scale number 1, which is the OG hatched risk here. So we would have to be watchful of significant severe weather stretching all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska, maybe even all the way towards Odessa, Texas here. And plenty of areas in between. We have Amarillo, Little Rock, or Lubbock, not Little Rock, jeez. Lubbock, Abilene, and Dodge City in the slight risk. We also have Wichita and even Hastings in that marginal risk as well to go along with it. And then the biggest day so far, to me, definitely is Friday. Now, interesting thing about the 4 to 8 day outlook, not much has really changed here. It's got that look that we all know and love. If you're a weather weenie, it's got the kind of semi-modern but also analog look to it as well. But we do get that enhanced risk at day 4 that we need to keep a close eye on. We're looking at the northern reaches of the Red River region, maybe even towards the Missouri River as well. We're stretching all the way into western parts of Missouri, into eastern parts of Kansas, stretching all the way into, again, east central and maybe parts of central Oklahoma, and maybe starting to flirt with far northern Texas, maybe extreme northern Texas as well. The slight risk stretches out much further. We're looking all the way into La Crosse, Wisconsin, maybe even into Chicago, Illinois as well, and extreme southern parts of Minnesota to go along with it, stretching all the way back towards even Austin. So pretty big threat for Friday. Definitely going to be looking to live stream this one, if nothing else. I should theoretically be off work unless it rains between tomorrow and Thursday. So I feel good about being able to stream this one. The other ones might be a little bit more difficult, but we're going to do the best that we can. I'm definitely thinking I have a good shot at Thursday. Tomorrow might be the only iffy day, but if I can, I'll try and stream it too. As far as anything beyond that, we do have predictability to low techs. As I mentioned before, troughing still remains even after the big day on Friday, so we could have multiple events even as we head into the start of next week. So let's get into the model data here, and this is where things really get intriguing. As I mentioned before, this is our first storm system right here. This isn't going to cause a whole lot of trouble right here from the looks of it. This does look like it's kind of coming apart a bit, but it's this sneaky little wind max that kind of develops over here where we'll have to keep our eyes open for any severe potential there. I expect the storms to be in a messy cluster just based off what we're seeing from the 500 millibar map here. I do think we're in range now with the 0Z to where we could look at this. So we always want to get that fresh model data here. Because one thing I always try to keep an eye on when we get new model data is just how is it looking in comparison to the previous run here. And not much has really changed. Wind max is a little bit stronger over here. We're kind of at 65 knots up into the higher levels of the atmosphere. So, again, I'm kind of leaning into that damaging wind threat. The real question for me is, do we get any discrete cells that can end up kind of being able to vent, being able to breathe to a point where it could take advantage of some of the lower level spin that could be available in the atmosphere. Like I said, it's a marginal risk for a tornado threat. Not rating it as a big severe weather event or tornado outbreak or anything like that. But there are some signals there that lead me to wonder if we could get something sneaky to occur here. Now, from what I can see, the timing definitely doesn't match up because the shortwave looks like it kind of deepens as we get into the overnight hours. But by this point, we would start to lose instability. We're in early stages of spring, so Cape numbers are usually not going to be that high. We're going to go ahead and take a look at that low-level jet, and I think this is going to be the key component in all of this. It doesn't really look like we have a whole lot available. It's a very small corridor, but I think, if anything, maybe this tri-state line between Illinois, Kentucky, and Indiana might be the point of interest. If you look really closely, you see this little pocket where we're at about 30 knots of low-level jet here. This is about 1,000 to 5,000 feet above our heads. Get that little bit of spin going, and then there you go. But the problem is, though, if these storms are in a messier mode, these storms can't really breathe. These storms don't really have the energy available to really tilt those updrafts from the horizontal, which they would typically start out in as a thunderstorm, and put them into the vertical to produce tornadoes. So, like I said, a lot more questions than answers with tomorrow's setup, more so than anything else. Definitely not your textbook setup by any stretch of the imagination here. So let's go ahead and actually move all the way into Thursday, and this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. Already you can see a major improvement in the potential with the severe weather setup just by looking at the low level jet alone. I haven't even looked at the higher levels for this yet from the new model run because we're still having this load in real time actually. So this is the first looks that I'm getting basically of the updated GFS here. The Euro still has time, has a little bit of time before the newest run comes in, so I will be checking that out in a moment. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay up late enough to kind of go over those details with you guys. But, simply put though, low-level jet at about 50 knots right around the Oklahoma Panhandle, Texas Panhandles, definitely going to lead to a point of interest there. If we were to actually see how that translates into the upper levels of the atmosphere, definitely see some intrigue there. There is a pretty profound short wave trough and also short waves in general that pop up over here towards the state as we get into Thursday. So Thursday could be a higher yielding day for sure. I mean, the SPC was kind of showing it, and it's pretty easy to see why just based off the GFS. Now, one thing I will say about this, GFS is typically known during this time of year to be a little bit more aggressive with severe storm setups versus the Euro. So, with us not looking at the Euro yet, we're still going to need to make our comparison. Let's see how this translates towards the upper levels of the atmosphere. And you can see that we have a pretty profound trough that's coming off the mountains here. We also have to be watchful of the gravity waves that will sometimes come off of parts of New Mexico and also over towards Colorado. This can help aid in severe thunderstorm development as well. Really, once you get these storms to develop, it's really up to the wind profile from that point. But sometimes these downslope gravity waves will help amplify rotation here too even. So something that we'll need to be keeping an extra close eye on here. But you're definitely seeing your share of activity over towards the eastern half of the Rockies here. How you doing, G bro? So one thing we're also going to be looking closely at is the dew points, of course, surface temperatures. What we were basically looking at was called the kinematics. We're looking at different levels of the atmosphere, looking at turning of the winds of height, basically, also looking at wind shear change in wind direction with height too. So you have speed shear, you have directional shear, everything for at least today, or I should say tomorrow, and Thursday look pretty good. Friday is not loaded in on this model run yet, so I'm really intrigued to see how that ends up playing out. Now, looking at the dew points, I'm not surprised to see a good moisture. I'm not surprised that we're getting a good moisture return here. I've been calling that for actually the last couple of weeks. When we were able to be a little bit more active, we were making more videos about this, and we were already picking up on this towards the end of February. So this really doesn't come to any surprise to those of you that were paying attention. And for those of you that weren't, well, this is probably one ingredient that we aren't going to have to worry about. I think Friday's just beginning to fully load in now, so we'll be going over that in just a little bit here. Now, one thing that I will say, Thursday looks a little bit more questionable because of the lack of moisture, or I wouldn't even say really even a lack of moisture. We have a strong dry line over here, but the moisture is pretty far out ahead of where I would expect the storms to develop. Because typically when you have this kind of look right here, the storms will often fire on the dry line, and if they can progress into the moisture, we have much stronger storms in general. But the moisture is a little bit further out ahead than what I'm used to seeing it as. So I have a couple of questions there, but we'll see how it goes. I think slight risk is still the call right now for the SPC. Depending on how this ends up playing out will determine whether or not we get an upgrade to enhanced or even more as we get into Thursday's outlook. It would not surprise me that if this uptrends that we would get an enhanced risk. I don't think we go beyond enhanced at this point, but we'll have to wait and see how it goes. And then, of course, as I mentioned with tomorrow's setup here, you can see it pretty clearly. Got the moisture return. Kinematics aren't all that great. I think we stay at a slight risk there. There could be a small area of interest where we may get that hatched risk, the OG hatch risk, to pop up here for a tornado threat. Again, it's going to be mainly over towards the tri-state region between Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky. Or at least that's my thought on it as of right now. As far as our temperatures are concerned, you're going to forgive me, I had a long day at work. I haven't really stopped. I just barely ate, and then I'm on here. But look at the surface temperatures. We're into the 70s. This is right where you would want to be for severe weather. We have dew points in the 60s over here too to go along with it, so there's not much of a spread between the temp and the dew point. It's always something that matters when it comes to severe weather. Now, this isn't the greatest example of a sounding for severe weather or tornadoes in general, but the main thing I want to highlight here is the spread that I mentioned before. The closer that these two are, the lower the cloud bases often will be. And it's a little bit easier for storms to produce tornadoes with lower cloud bases. Usually if you have good dew points that are corresponding with a surface temperature that's relatively close, then you can end up having something like that. But again, one of the big limiting factors with tomorrow's setup is the wind profile. This is towards a point of interest, but at this point, from what we're seeing here, not really much to write home about. And I mean, like I said, that was kind of to be expected at this point. Now let's go ahead and move this into Thursday here. Already there's a big difference. The surface temps are a lot hotter over here. We're even getting into the 80s, maybe even a little bit beyond here. But moisture is still, remember, from what we were seeing, it's a little further off towards the east here. A little bit closer over towards Oklahoma City. Maybe just outside was where that boundary started there, where we get into the really rich moisture. Now, as we mentioned before with the Thursday setup, the kinematics are a lot better here. But there's that spread between the dew point and the surface temperature here. That 11-degree spread is pretty significant, and look how the cloud bases are a little bit higher here. Our LCL, lifted condensation level, is lower, but the lift-free condensation is a lot higher. We want these two to be pretty much right on top of each other to get those lower cloud bases that we were mentioning earlier. That and some inhibition here may help limit activity and keep it at bay for a little bit longer. But I do think also with that comes a potential of maybe an overnight threat. Because what often will happen as we get into spring is we'll see a cap come in early in the day, keeps everything at bay, but eventually over time a frontal boundary, a trough, some kind of lifting mechanism comes in and takes the top off of this, and then we get our storms to fire into the evening and even overnight hours. From what I'm seeing on the soundings here, that doesn't look to be the case. So I'm not too worried about it as of right now. But we're going over some of the typical stuff that we will probably continue to see as we head into spring here at this point. Now, this is where things will start to get interesting. The big day undoubtedly looks like it's going to be Friday at this point. So this is Thursday evening that we're looking at right now. Let's go ahead and watch this jet stream progress here. We're looking in the higher levels of the atmosphere once again. So you can see that this deepens. We get a little bit of a jet streak that pops up here as well. We're not quite getting into that 100 knot territory here, so that is one positive. But a little further out ahead of that, that's where the action ends up being. We're going to probably have a bimodal event. And of course, what I mean by bimodal, that's of course two. But we're going to have what looks to be a potential for a northern mode, which would be parts of Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, maybe even parts of Missouri. And then we'll have a southern mode, which is over towards the Arklatex or the Oklatex or the Oak Artex. The way they do the nicknames here always throws me off. Anyway, though. But either way, no matter how you look at it, definitely see potential for two modes of severe weather right now. Now, this northern mode, I have a lot of questions in regards to that. With this, I would say that the kinematics here are going to be really good. It's all going to boil down to moisture return and the surface temperature. Surface temperatures are too cold, we got nothing. If the convective mode is trash, just sloppy convective storms, tornado threat, severe weather threat is going to be a lot lower here. Do think hail potential would be higher here. But overall coverage might be a little bit more scarce. Now, this southern mode here, this intrigues me the most for tornado potential. I think this region is going to be a point of interest because we're going to have all the energy. We're still going to get a glancing blow from this jet stream right here as well. But we're going to have we're going to be in a spot where we still get plenty of turning of the winds with height, balanced with the thermodynamics as well. We're going to have good moisture. We're going to have good surface temperatures. So it's going to be pretty warm over here. This is a spot where I think the atmosphere will be able to take advantage, or these storms will be able to take advantage of said atmosphere. It could potentially do something significant. So the southern mode I'm kind of favoring right now over the northern mode. If we go ahead and take a look at some of the other profiles, we're going to look in the mid levels of the atmosphere. You can see clearly where we have that mid-level trough here. You can see where the winds are stronger, and you can also see where the short waves are. Short waves are a little bit further off towards the south. So, with that in mind, like I said before, northern mode definitely looks like it's going to be here. Southern mode here. Which of the two wins out? Time will only tell. How you doing, CC? Go ahead and take a look at the low level jet, and like I said, this is probably going to be one of the most interesting parts of the setup so far. If we look at the big setup for Friday, like I said, this northern mode is going to be questionable as the kinematics, again, really good over here. It's going to be all about thermodynamics here. The southern mode, we're going to have more than adequate enough low level jet that probably is actually going to be deepening over towards this area as we get later into the evening. So we could be looking at a nocturnal event potentially over here as well. So it's another thing that I'm going to be watching going forward here. But Friday has all, at least kinematically speaking, and keep in mind, I still haven't had a chance to look at everything from this model run, which is literally loading as we speak, by the way. But at least kinematically speaking, we're already looking pretty stacked here. So we're looking at dew points for the first time off of this run right now. The moisture return, like I said, that's going to be a key component over here towards northern states. The northern mode here, like I said, I really think if we have decent moisture and we don't get too many storms to fire over towards this area, if we get any sort of crap convection, this northern mode is pretty much comped. But this southern mode here, the moisture that we have available here, combined with the kinematics only getting better as the day goes on, I'd say there's a much higher ceiling with this. Now, if I'm being completely honest, both modes could fail here and we get nothing out of anything the whole entire day. But at least at this point, though, I would say if I'm a chaser, I'm looking at this southern mode here. Sure, it's the Ozarks, not chaser-friendly terrain, but if you're looking to see a big tornado, right now I would bet my money here. Now, if I were to look at this tomorrow, depending on what changes, I could change my mind and say the northern mode. But at least at this point, though, in the early going, I'm putting my money on the southern. So another thing we're going to be looking at, like I said before, dew point. We looked at dew points. We're looking at surface temperature now. My other concern with this event as well, it has a lot more to do with any sort of prefrontal showers that pop up here. Anything that kind of stifles this air temperature a bit, keeps it down a little bit more in this northern mode, also limits the event. There's a lot more fail parameters with the northern mode versus the southern mode. If you look, you compare the temperatures, the southern mode, if we're looking over towards parts of northwestern Louisiana into central southern parts of Arkansas, we're getting into the mid to upper 70s, even a few 80s sprinkled in. Surface temperature already looking a lot better for severe potential than the northern mode. Then if we were to combine that with the dew points, like I said, dew points might be a little bit of a gray area there, but with rich moisture getting into the 60s, we're looking pretty good either way. Now, like I said, some of these soundings that I'm clicking on aren't necessarily geared towards trying to highlight tornado potential, but the main thing I want to show you is what the temperature and the dew point look like at the same time and how these two can end up behaving when it comes to severe weather genesis. If you want to see SKUTs with heightened tornado potential, just give me a minute. Trust me. I will show you all that you want to see in just a bit, actually. So, probably one of the biggest factors, and we're actually gonna backtrack and do the same thing for the other days after we look at the Friday setup. It's going to be, of course, our energy, our CAPE, convective available potential energy. This is going to be our thunderstorm food, and the more of it there is, the stronger the storms will be. So again, like I said, northern mode, this is one of the big questions. This is also lumped in with what's called thermodynamics. You can see towards the lower levels we have pretty good shear there, but as we go further up into the atmosphere, it's just not really cooperating to the point where tornado potential is high. But notice a couple of things already. With that temperature dew point spread being a little bit closer together, look at how that cloud base has dropped now. If the turning of the winds with height were better at multiple levels of the atmosphere, especially towards the mid levels, think this has a much higher tornado threat. But given the fact that we're probably going to be dealing with rain-cooled air over here, we're leaning more into a damaging wind threat than we are a tornado threat over here. Cape value isn't quite as high. We're looking at surface cape of around about 1,200 plus joules per kilogram, maybe around the 1250s. It's good enough for severe weather, good enough for tornadoes, but you would probably want higher cape values. Now, if we were to go ahead and shift our attention over towards eastern parts of Arkansas, look what we have here, and look at how much of a difference we end up having because of it. So if you look closely, you can see much greater temperature dew point spread, raises the cloud base higher, but not by all that much. We want it lower still in regards to tornado potential, but the wind profile is a little bit more friendly towards tornado genesis, although the storm mode will be a lot messier. These are most likely going to be rain wrapped as well, but there's a lot more energy available with these, so the ceiling is slightly higher with this. So like I said, a lot of complications with these setups. It's going to be a lot. This setup, it's going to be a lot of moving parts here. But either way, as far as our peak potential, I do think that this kind of picks up as we get later into the evening. Can we keep the energy with these storms is going to be the key question for the southern mode as we get later into the evening. Because eventually what I would expect to happen is these storms are going to likely start to cluster up and gust out. And once that happens, we're looking at a big squall line as we get into Saturday. So do the same thing with the Euro, and I guess that's going to be it. Sorry if I seem a little out of it. I kind of am. I'm going to be completely honest. I've been getting my butt kicked at work. But I'm hanging in there. So here's our setup for tomorrow. Not too dissimilar from what we've seen from GFS. Timing is about the same. Slightly more impressive upper level trough, I'd say. But it doesn't really look like it's going to make all that much of a difference. My areas of interest haven't really changed. At least with the Euro, though, I would say that low level jet kind of increases later into the evening. But at this point, I would say instability kind of goes away at this point. And this also would end up limiting tomorrow's event on Wednesday. It's getting to Thursday. It's looking a little bit more robust, but even so, Euro's looking like the more passive of the two models, which is kind of what we called for, if I'm being honest. So no real surprises there. Really, I think it's the low-level jet that could drive this severe weather threat home if it gets going. Now, again, as I mentioned before, 0Z Euro still has a couple hours before it starts loading, and depending on what that ends up showing could easily change the game too. But this is what we're looking like as we get into Thursday evening. Now here's Friday, and Friday is where things kind of get really wacky here with this. The more stout look that we had with the GFS does not really exist with the Euro. So that means we end up getting an entirely different forecast as a result. So looking at the Euro from the perspective of the mid-level jet, not quite as pronounced. We do get a small little max that pops up here where we get to about 56 knots. Still lead to damaging wind potential, especially for that northern mode, maybe central mode storms. But this doesn't really end up giving much of a chance to the southern mode at this point when we're looking at Euro. Now, when you get to the low-level jet, this could be the only saving grace available for that southern mode at this point, because the northern mode doesn't really look like it gets much of a chance according to the Euro. So Depending on which model you like to look at, this is either great news or it's bad news, depending on which outcome you would want. But yeah, if you want a big severe weather event, you're pulling for that GFS scenario. If you want something more tame, then it's definitely Euro. Well, high time, that really depends on which model you're looking at right now, because the Euro is not looking quite as good. I mean, I still see something there, but it's definitely not as robust as the GFS is right now. And keep in mind, when I'm talking about the GFS, I'm talking about the latest run from the GFS, the 0Z, which is still loading as we speak. I'm really looking forward to seeing everything start to get into range of the convectives here, start getting into range of the RAP, NAM, and then eventually HRRR and NAM 3 kilometer, double RFS. Because as good as it is to have the GFS showing it, the Euro isn't, so it's a little bit more inconclusive for me. The Euro is not giving any moisture at all to those areas of interest on Friday. Like I said, this 18Z Euro, we still have another probably hour or two before the 0Z starts to load, and it's going to probably be like another 30 minutes before we would get in range after that. So ultimately, not going to be able to catch that. Not going to be able to catch that update in time tonight because I need to be going to bed soon, and that's if I can even stay awake long enough anyway, which I probably can't. I've been having some long days at work. Yeah. So from what we can see here, the Euro definitely does have storm initiation, but it forms up perhaps, excuse me, perhaps a little too early. And the end game as a result is we probably see limited severe potential as well. The reason why I say the Euro is not really out of it just yet, if I look at the amount of instability available, there's still something there. As long as you have Cape and you have decent wind profiles, it doesn't have to be perfect lapse rates, it doesn't have to be perfect dew point, it doesn't have to be perfect, anything. As long as you have just a little bit of something, you can always cook, or these storms can always cook in this case. We will what morning brings us in Wichita this morning. I'm not sure. You might have to reword that because I'm like, man, I'm trying to figure it out, man. I don't know what are you asking me a question or? Thanks, Deborah. Oh, we will see. Okay, it's all right. It's all right. Yeah, it might have been me too, cause I'm tired. I'm not gonna lie and say that I'm not. I'm very tired. It's been a long day. I normally don't stream this late, so maybe I misunderstood. Who knows? But main point I was making though, Euro still showing potential for severe weather. Perhaps not as high as ceiling, but still worth warranting attention. Hello, Kyle Harrelson. Oh, you didn't word it right? No need to apologize, it happens. You should see what some of my mods have done over the years. And sometimes what they still do. But let's go ahead and try to see if we can mix the photographs in with this one. Yeah, it doesn't really look like we get a good mix of cape with the kinematics here. I think this is probably one of the better ones we'll find. One thing that's really kind of caught my eye here was both GFS and the Euro. If we do get supercells to fire, we might have some really nice views of the updraft, at least early on. I do think eventually that rain does end up winning out, and these will end up being a bunch of rain wrap slop, especially as eventually it would congeal into a line. But you might be able to get a few photogenic tornadoes early. I can understand that. To a point I can relate, but I'm not a delivery driver. But I do run a route, so I get you. But I'm not in the area of interest. Not this time around. Maybe in a few weeks that might be us, though. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take a quick look at what the simulated radar is showing us for pretty much all the days. We're going to start out with the Euro, then we're going to go with the GFS and kind of go on from there. Going to have to cut this one a little short tonight because I'm probably going to have to be up in the next like 6 hours, so yeah. And honestly, I'm struggling to even keep my eyes open right now anyway, because I've been up since, well, 5 a.m. or 5:30. So, yeah. It's been a long day. So, at least with the Euro, and I'm pretty sure the GFS is going to follow suit. Definitely looks like Wednesday we get the clusters that we were mentioning here. I'm still leery about the tri-state region here. Not quite the quad state, because I think Missouri is probably going to be okay. They are in that area of interest, but I think the best corridor for everything is going to be over towards Kentucky, Indiana, not Iowa. Indiana and Illinois here. Not a problem, high time. I love doing this. I would love to do this full time. With Thursday's mode, by the way, in case anyone missed it, we talked about dry lines. This definitely has that look of a dry line like setup. And most likely, if this does do anything, it's probably going to be an overnight situation, truthfully. Because there's going to be a pretty strong cap in place that keeps things from developing early into the day. But eventually, as we get the forcing mechanism, which honestly is going to be the dry line in this case, there could be a little feature that comes in from the mountains that could kick things off a little bit earlier. But I think it's going to be a little too far to the north at this point. So I'm thinking we'll probably see a big line of storms possibly develop along the dry line as we get into the overnight hours on Thursday here. I think everything's still in play at that point, but I'm thinking damaging winds and hail are going to probably still be the prevailing threat. And then with this, gosh, there's so many X factors with Friday's setup. The ceiling is very high though. If the northern mode can keep its act together, keep itself kind of clean, no bad convection or crapvection, I do think we could see potential for severe weather, maybe even a few tornadoes here as well. Later into the evening, maybe even into the twilight hours heading into overnight, I think the southern mode really starts to take off at that point before ultimately seeing it congealed into a line as we get into Saturday. And this is a pretty strong line of storms too from the looks of it on Euro, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that for the deep south going forward. And then from that point, things calm down for a brief period. And now, at this point, we have everything we need from the GFS as well. anyone that missed that, GFS has had the more aggressive look out of the two model runs for a bit now. And since the new run is in, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, one thing about the GFS that I'll make sure that I'll make sure to inform you that the resolution isn't quite as high with this. So it's going to look a little bit different from the Euro. That's just kind of how it goes. But for the most part, these areas where we're seeing the little yellow blotches, it's going to be pretty similar to what we were seeing with the Euro. Storm clusters there. Don't go for shock value. Yeah, we don't do that here. We absolutely do not do shock value. Now, if something does look pretty dangerous to me, I will emphasize that. But we don't want people to panic. Panic leads to problems. So, we're not trying to scare anyone here. We're going to tell you how it is. And unfortunately, that probably has kept my view count down. But hey, I kind of value trying to be accurate and honest versus being viral and wrong 100% of the time. That's just me. Okay, so looking at the preset for the GFS, we get into the Thursday setup. GFS is kind of doing the same thing, but it maybe looks like it could be more of a supercellular mode. Like I said, GFS has been showing a lot more severe potential over the Euro in this case here. Whether it's been the ensembles or the operational runs that we look at. Typically, I don't really show ensembles on here often. I probably should do that more, but I'm kind of rushing tonight. Honestly, I'm just glad I was even able to be live tonight. And then as we go into Friday, here's our storms developing a little bit later with the GFS. I think the lack of moisture and probably messy convection over towards the northern states limits this mode. There is some cold pooling over here that could change the game with this too, though. So still can't sleep on this just yet. But you can see that the southern mode here really starts to take off as we get later into the evening and even into the overnight hours. Eventually, again, consolidates into a line. We have to watch that for the deep south as we get into Saturday. This kind of lingers a little bit longer as we get into Sunday, and then as we go from that point and beyond here, we'll finally see things calm down. So that's pretty much all I got with this week's severe weather setup. Going further beyond here, like I said before, it does look like we're going to have more opportunities as we get into the future. I'm going to go ahead and show that jet stream one final time before we head out. A couple of questions. I'm only going to have time to answer a few because I gotta hit the hay like ASAP. So this is what our trough is looking like as we head into Saturday. We get our little cutoff low here, and this actually ends up being a blessing in disguise. This actually slows down severe weather potential for a brief period. But by the time we get into next week, this thing's rolling again, and then this thing's ready to cause some trouble. We're going to have to be really watchful at this point of the Ozarks and the deep south by the time we get into next week. And then from that point, we might have one or two more troughs, but I think our attention could be shifting a bit more towards winter weather. So we get a decent push of cold air as we get towards the middle part of the month. And then going beyond that, it looks like we kind of level off for a brief period, which is a welcome break, I'm pretty sure. Which will be a welcome break, I'm pretty sure, for a few of us. All right, so anybody got questions? I'll answer a couple, then I'm gonna have to head straight to bed. Thoughts on Friday and Thursday for Arkansas? I don't think you see anything on Thursday for Arkansas. I think you'll be just fine for Thursday. Friday is the more interesting day. I definitely think Friday afternoon looks to be the time frame. The spread between the GFS and the Euro with timing. The Euro has storms firing a little bit earlier, potentially mid-afternoon. GFS kind of favors more of a little bit of later activity, maybe just around or right after sunset. Both do have a pretty good yield on tornado potential. GFS definitely seems to be the more aggressive of the two. GFS has a lot more low-level jet available, so tornadic ingredients are a little bit more abundant there, just from that one aspect alone. But the key to me though would be, once these storms start to fire, how much energy will be left over to allow these to continue? Because one thing I did notice with both models is that the Cape, it definitely seemed like it started to fade away a lot faster as we got into the overnight. We're still in the early parts of spring, so we're not going to have those 3,000, 4,000 plus Cape days right off rip. Because once you get those, that's when we start getting these long duration severe weather events that could last for 8 to 10 hours easily. Not to say that this one can either, but at least from first glances here, that doesn't look like it's in the cards. At least not initially. Now, we could see a couple of different model runs come in tomorrow that throw that out of the water completely, that blow that out of the water completely. We could be talking about a 12-hour day. But at least initially, we're not looking too bad. Yeah, same here. I mean, I'm from Georgia, but we get our share of action too. I mean, we're Dixie. We're both part of Dixie Alley, so at the end of the day, we know what it is. Not by choice either. All right. Anyone else got questions? Any? This will probably be the last one. Absolutely. Absolutely. Plan is definitely going to be to go live on Friday. Depending on how the work week goes, maybe Thursday. All right. But last chance for questions. If anyone's still here. I know a few of you are probably going to bed. I'm sorry for starting the stream so late. I wanted to get here sooner, but like I said, it's been a long day. A lot of ripping and running. Sorry for bumping the mic. And as you can see, I'm kind of groggy myself. But I think this will do it for tonight as far as I'm concerned. I'll try and see what I can do for a morning video. I can't guarantee the best we can. But appreciate you all being here. And I'm going to see you all most likely tomorrow. Hopefully.